If Mark Chipman is to be believed, the Jets ain't leaving. Not anytime soon, and especially not with a new rink lease. But do we really feel confident in that? We'll dive into all of that and more on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on X at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Now, like I said, Mark Chipman recently gave an interview with Darren Dreger the other day, and, I waited a bit to kind of think about how to approach his response to a question, right? One in which he was asked about, are the Jets in danger of relocating? What is the situation with the team? Because the attendance is now starting to hit national media. The Jets not really selling out games and having quite a few empty seats is definitely making waves. The Jets media has also picked up on it, even pointing out that the last game against the Blues had the lowest ever recorded Jets 2.0 history since the pandemic. So, yeah, not exactly, great figures when we're talking about butts and seats. And make no mistake, right? Regardless of whatever the front office tells us, there is an uncomfortable truth that, attendance with this team is really critical to the economic success and viability of this franchise. I think, they've maybe downplayed it a little bit, but there was a thing last year that we all remember, the Forever Winnipeg campaign. You noticed it got shut down really quick because after a brief bit of marketing from them, we were all kind of taken aback by the fact that, right before the playoffs, the Jets are basically not so subtly hinting that the threat of relocation is a concern. The fact that, they were saying we need to keep the team here and all of this stuff, and we need your support to do it, basically felt like they were telling us that the attendance wasn't good enough and that at some point, if it didn't turn around, things would start to escalate and maybe even the team leaves again, right? And so, Chipman sat down and basically downplayed all of it, said that's not the case at all. That the attendance, he did say it's not been great, basically, but he wasn't really concerned and that it didn't have enough of an impact on the team to remotely be a consideration for relocation. I guess my concern is that, despite having a lot of financial resources and, True North doing pretty well in the real estate business around Winnipeg, I do kind of wonder with the Jets, is there a breaking point, right? Like, how long could this continue where fans aren't really buying into it? Now, I've seen, I think Spit and Chicklets was talking about, the attendance mystery and how is this possible and, why is this happening? What's wrong with Winnipeg and all that sort of stuff. And they didn't really seem to understand, A, the economic situation, and B, the state of the team, right? For one thing, Jets tickets ain't cheap. Even with the discounted rates and ticket promos that the Jets have done recently, you're still probably paying around $60 to $70, which for folks, it's tough. In an inflation economy, post-pandemic, everything is really expensive. And so going to a Jets game is not as easy of a sell as it used to be. The Jets have been around for a while, honeymoon's over, and the team hasn't been good for the past few years. So all of that in mind, right, you're kind of looking at this and you're seeing a perfect storm of issues. Now, another interesting thing is that generally speaking, when it comes to like the proportion of fan sales versus corporate sales, the Jets actually do reasonably well with the fan sales. It's the corporate sales that have really tailed off, and that really is a lot of lost revenue. Corporate ticket sales and suite packages and stuff, That's pretty big money, and the Jets aren't really seeing as much of it as they were in previous years. So their marketing team and their tickets revenue team is going to have to work on that, I'm sure. That's probably something that they're trying to really reinforce. But, circling back to the general lack of attendance, I think it just shows that at this point, the Jets fan base has expectations. And I think, Winnipeg has struggled to keep up with those at times, partly because they've been able to coast off that honeymoon period for many, many, many years. And I think the fear of relocation and all of that kind of made Jets fans almost hesitant to really speak up or voice their concerns about the squad. But now that the Jets have been around for a while and Winnipeg has seen all these other teams doing really well, while the Jets kind of, have spun their wheels a bit, I think people are starting to really take notice and actually vote with their wallets. So, while I do appreciate hearing that, True North is committed to staying in Winnipeg and all that, I do still have a quiet fear in the back of my mind that things may eventually change. And I really don't like that thought. The NHL has probably mentioned the attendance to Winnipeg already. If the national media is already talking about it, that behind the scenes, the NHL has probably said something to the Jets that it's got to improve. I'm sure Bettman and the ownership of the league isn't really thrilled with it, and I'm sure the Jets themselves aren't in love with the attendance either. It's not a great look, and financially speaking, it's a lot of lost money. So, yeah, for the Jets, I mean, I don't think it's going to be an issue like as soon as next year or the year beyond, but I think the longer that the fan base continues to hold out, the worse this is going to get. So I think it's really imperative for the Jets, now that they've locked up Scheifele and Hellebuck, to really go to market and go to bat for this team, because I really do think that this year's Jets team is on the right path towards being really fun. They do have a couple of big changes to make it. I think they really need to illustrate what those changes are and how they plan to do it to a fan base that has, quite frankly, become pretty jaded with Jets hockey. This is probably the least enthused that I've seen the Jets fan base in many years. Honestly, I never thought it would get to this point because, Jets fans are notoriously diehard and really defend the team over almost anything. But now that's really come and gone. And I think the pandemic has really changed the outlook for a lot of things. I know Chipman will say that the pandemic was a big reason that we're seeing such a low attendance, but I think there's a lot of other stuff under the surface that the Jets are going to have to deal with sooner rather than later. The longer this does go on, the worse it's going to get. And I think it'd be nice if, there was a reason for fans to get excited about the team again. But maybe you have a different perspective. What do you feel about this team? Are you a season ticket holder who hasn't renewed, or are you? And why have you done so? Drop your feedback in the YouTube comment section below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on X. Now, in the meantime, I did want to talk about a couple of things, namely the biggest surprises this season with this team and the biggest disappointments. We'll start with the good stuff in just a little bit, but before we go any further, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your car or truck and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits, LED lighting kits, no matter what you need, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts available for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you need. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure the part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And we all love to burn rubber when it comes to hitting the highways and making sure that our vehicle is in tip-top shape. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your vehicle into the MVP and bring home the victory. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's episodes as we talk about the biggest surprises so far from this early start to the season. Obviously, we've only had like 6 games for the Jets, and Winnipeg is 3-3, right? But I'd say they actually deserve to have a better record than that. I think Winnipeg has played pretty well in a lot of these games. A couple of them not so well, but recently, I think we've seen. I think a good example is the Blues game, right? The Jets really controlled most of the play. Where they did struggle was kind of in the stuff that they've struggled with the whole season, which is a bit of a leaky defense. The blue line has been a bit of an issue. We'll talk about that later and whether or not that really counts as a surprise or I guess a disappointment. But talking about the biggest surprises, I've got to say I'm pretty surprised with Iafallo. Not because I didn't think he was capable of being a really good player for the Jets, but I didn't think he'd hit the ground running so quickly and kind of cement himself as one of the biggest acquisitions the Jets have made in that Dubois trade. He's already had a handful of goals. He's been an absolute pest, and his finishing is the kind of style that, with this team that I do think is repeatable. He's already earned himself a promotion to the top line, which is great. I maybe would change his positioning just a little bit in terms of where he is in the top six, but in terms of talking about what he's done for merit, absolutely does deserve a top six billing. I think Iafallo has been a brilliant find. I was always a fan of his and felt that he was perhaps a little bit underrated in LA, but now that he's joined the Jets, I really think people are seeing why he's kind of a menace down low. He's very smart. Somebody has called him the poor man's Matthew Perreault, which I mentioned, I think, on a previous episode. I would be perhaps a little more generous than that. I think he's very smart, and I think he understands how to attack space really well. He's not going to be the kind of guy who elevates his line mates like Perreault used to, but Iafallo in his own right is a great naturally gifted scorer. I just didn't think he'd already have like 3 or 4 goals to start the season. That, for a guy who has traditionally been around a 30 to 35 point player throughout his career, is really impressive, and it suggests that perhaps there's a little more pop in that stick than we've seen before. Or maybe he's also just getting a little bit fortunate, but I'm going to choose to be optimistic about it. Another surprise I would say is that Kupari has been so good for the Jets so far. He's actually been a little bit unfortunate that he doesn't have more points, which is kind of funny because he has been cast in a fourth line role, but he seems to play a lot. I always feel like I see him coming out for shifts on a routine basis. He plays on the PK. He's even been given power play time, which I'm not so sure about that part. But in terms of what he does at even strength and stuff, he's been a delight to watch. He's really, really, really fast. When people said he was the fastest player in the league by speed this year, I saw it, but I don't think it registered for me how fast he was until I saw him against St. Louis, and he just blew by guys like they weren't even there. It reminded me almost of Brad Lambert skating, right? Effortless, fast, strong, and so smooth. I like what Kupari does with it, though. He basically drives right for the slot. He's not afraid to crash the net area, and he loves to create chaos down low. Do I think his game has certain limitations? Yes, zero question. He's not like a Brad Lambert when it comes to offensive creation and all of that. But I will say that his speed is very effective at creating chaos and disrupting opposing defenses. If that's his best trait and his whole thing is to basically occasionally get the puck into dangerous areas, but also keep it away from the opponents. That for me is more than acceptable, especially in the role that he's been cast. He's been really fun to watch. He seems like he's got a little bit more to offer than what we've seen already. So I'm excited to see him play with some actual skill. But yeah, so far really impressed with Kupari. I think he's been another really fine addition in a trade that just continues to look better and better for the Jets. I knew that, from day one, the Dubois trade haul was good to me. Like, it just was. I was a fan of it. I liked all of the players in the package. And while Kupari was perhaps more of a wild card, I still felt like there was, intrigue with him, even if it was modest intrigue. But this whole trade has just really, really aged well for the Jets. Dubois has been fine for the Kings. He does what he does. But, once we have a full year of Velarde and Iafallo and Kupari together, this is a dynamite group of players the Jets have acquired. And I've got to say, they've already fit in beautifully. Now, I guess a last big surprise that I'll talk about, and this one is, an interesting one, right? Because it's not surprising in the sense of being unexpected, but I would say it's a little bit surprising in that, it's just nice to see it happen. And that's that the Jets have 4 lines that they can roll consistently. I knew coming into this year that the Jets would have a much deeper roster than they've had in previous seasons. And, part of my hesitation in calling this a surprise is because, on paper, this Jets team to me looked really good. But where the surprise comes in is that it's been so effective at actually creating chaos down low, using those waves of pressure to overwhelm opponents, and having guys routinely cycling the puck effectively. I feel like the passing has been tighter this year. I feel like the waves of pressure and the effective use of forechecking has gotten better. It just feels like the Jets are actually living up to the promise of what this team has on paper, which I know it sounds really stupid, but given what we've seen from this team over the last several years, I feel like it's actually worth spotlighting. It's surprising to see this team not only control play against opponents and some of them being quality opponents, but also create good scoring opportunities and finish them. It's not always been the case that the Jets were able to capitalize on the chances that they were creating. But with this team this year, it feels like perhaps the winds are shifting a bit in Winnipeg's favor. So there's a lot to like with this team. There is stuff that also needs some big time adjustments. The defense is one that I think is probably worth spending some time talking about at some point, but I've already spent a lot of time as it is focusing on it. So in just a little bit, I thought I'd talk about some of the biggest disappointments, some of which are going to be surprising, some of which are probably, just about what you'd expect. We'll get to those in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Game Time. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you have probably gone through the process and you might not actually enjoy it. Whether you're buying concert tickets or sporting event tickets, it's always a pain in the butt. Let's be real, right? You get hit with hidden fees. A lot of those tickets are a bit of a grab bag too. You're not entirely sure where you're sitting or standing, and perhaps you don't even know that there's a big obstacle right in front of you that's going to keep you from enjoying the event to the absolute fullest. Game Time is here to help. They offer a great selection of tickets, and they are known for having last-minute ticket deals, flash deals, and in-venue views, so you know exactly what you're paying for, and you also know that you're getting the best price possible. They take all of the guesswork out of it and offer you killer last-minute deals that help you stop worrying about getting those tickets to the next big game or show. They've got plenty of events coming up, whether it's Jets games or perhaps even those big concerts like Taylor Swift. No matter what you're into, Game Time is here to help, and it's very easy to get started. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL. That's LOCKED ONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we close out with some final thoughts on the biggest disappointments to an early start to the season. Biggest disappointment, number one, the PK. The penalty kill has taken a massive step back and one that I wasn't really expecting. Arneo, I thought, had actually fixed it last year and made it at least league average, which, look, I get it. It doesn't sound that sexy when I put it in those rather crass terms, but I'll be honest. A league average PK was basically like being gifted the Maradona Hand of God goal, if you're talking about like from a magical moment, something that you couldn't believe happened. The Jets having a working penalty kill was kind of on that level for me, in part because we're so used to watching the Jets PK just sit there and not really absorb pressure, but certainly pretend it is, while basically conceding goal after goal after goal and putting Hellebuyck through the absolute ringer. I thought they fixed it. And then this year, the PK has gone back to being really bad. I mean, it's like pre-Maurice, or it's the Maurice era PK, where the Jets sit in a diamond. They don't chase the puck carrier effectively. They don't close off space. And it's basically a shooting gallery for Hellebuyck to get pieced apart on cross-slot passes. It's not good, and the Jets have to work on it because if they let it keep going as it is, it's going to be one of their Achilles heels, especially because disappointment number two, Hellebuyck's early season form hasn't exactly been stellar. Now, I'll say for this one, I expect it to turn around. I think Helly is already starting to shift again and become that great goaltender that we're used to. He's made some darling saves in the last 2 games. He was a big reason the Jets beat the Oilers the other night, and it seems like he's, starting to get back into game state readiness. So that part I'm not really worried about, but the PK is going to be a problem the whole year if Arniel doesn't make adjustments. That can't stay as it is. They've got to be aggressive. They've got to be able to pressure puck carriers and cut down those lanes, because if you can force your opponents into mistakes, good things will tend to happen. You might even get yourself one of the niftiest short-handed goals you've ever seen. You know exactly what I'm talking about, thanks to Josh Morrissey and Adam Lowry. So, yeah, the more pressure you have on the PK, the better off your life is going to be, instead of sitting there watching your opponents score on you and do a nasty little celly right in front of Hellebuyck. We don't like that. Let's be real. We do not like that. Now, the third disappointment that I'll point out, and one that I'm sure everyone's going to say, "Oh, we knew it was going to happen." No, you didn't. First off, that's the truth. But second off, it just sucks because Nikolai Ehlers so far this year has really not been very Ehlers-like. He's really just looked very hesitant out there, and it doesn't seem like he's at his top speed. He hasn't been able to create as many dangerous opportunities. He hasn't really had that separation distance from opposing defenders, and he's not really getting the puck into dangerous areas or finding the back of the net as much as he was last year. In the games that he did play last year, he was dynamite, right? But this year, it just feels like he's been present, and he's not exactly playing poorly, but more often than not, we're seeing, not a lot of offensive production, and then he has a really bad turnover or something that just ends up getting turned into a counter of some sort. And I'm sure Ehlers himself has been really frustrated in how he's played. I think he had a moment in the last game where the puck didn't quite settle for him. He either roofed the shot or it got saved at the top of Binnington's body, and he kind of tossed his stick up a little bit. It was a moment of frustration, and he's always been one to wear his heart on his sleeve. He's kind of another one where I expect at some point the dam's going to break and he'll be back to himself, but he might just not be physically feeling up to it yet. So we'll see. Hoping for the best, but, the longer this continues, it's going to be tougher for him to get out of it. So let's hope that this dry spell for him is relatively short and ends quickly. Now, the last disappointment that I'll talk about is, look, and I get it. I've talked about it a lot already, but I've really got to say that blue line being as bad as it's been is a huge disappointment. I didn't expect it to be struggling as much as it has. It wasn't great before, but it felt like at least the Jets were treading water. This year, the defense has been extremely porous, to the point where there are some players on the blue line right now that I'm not sure you can play more than 10 minutes a night. And that's just not good enough, right? You've got to get more out of that defense. They've got to be able to at least be close to break even. I don't care if they're slightly under or slightly above. Just try and limit the chances against and be decent enough to help the forwards out when they need offensive support. It's been a lot to ask so far, and unfortunately, with the Jets maybe not getting the best goaltending from Hellebuyck in some of these games, it's been a bit of a nightmare match. So let's hope that it ends quickly. Maybe the Jets can make a couple of deals here pretty soon to reformat the blue line. I feel like this team with a fixed back end would be so much better and so much more enjoyable and so much more dangerous and consistent. So cross your fingers that the defense is going to get fixed at some point this year. I expect it'll be more marginal changes, but perhaps we get surprised. Either way, let me know how you're feeling about the season and your biggest surprises and disappointments in the comments below or at my social medias on X. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow for thoughts on the Red Wings game, so stay tuned. As always, have a great night, and go Jets, go.